He followed the whistling into the cornfield. He told himself it was wind in the stalks, nothing more. But the sound had shape, and it carried a tune the way a bottle carries a ship. It rose up from the edge of the north field just before midnight, thin and certain, 3 notes first, then a run, then a pause, that felt like a person making room for breath. The night in Story County, Iowa, was the kind that makes a kitchen window into a mirror. He stood with one hand on the sill, the other around a chipped mug, and the whistling kept at it, unafraid to be heard. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2015. The day had been warm, sky rinsed clean after a brief storm, gravel roads drying into their usual rattle. The farm sat 1.5 miles south of Nevada, east of the Skunk River, where it hooks like a lazy elbow. The corn had gone that heavy, dull gold that means the grain is ready and the husks are sick of holding on. In the house, the bedside clock down the hall said 11:52. On the porch, a moth bumped the bulb, reconsidered, bumped again. Merritt Dow listened and felt his scalp move, the way skin does when a memory gets up and looks at you. He had heard whistling most of his life, but not like this. His father had been a whistler when he repaired the sickle bar, when he checked the tension on the auger belts. His grandfather, too, walking the rows with a plug of tobacco and a tune older than the tractor. Merritt could place a tune by county if you gave him a night and a jar of iced tea. This one, though it didn't belong to any porch or station wagon, it had the small brightness of a fairground and the old soul of a hymn, mixed wrong on purpose and still somehow right. He set the mug down, pulled on his boots without bothering with the laces, and stepped into the porch light. The whistling came again, 3 notes that stepped down like someone walking off a train. He clicked off the switch. The yard went honest. The gravel drive was a gray river. The corn made its tinny rain sound whenever the breeze remembered its job. To the north, the trees along the fence line held their breath. Merritt had a habit of heading toward curiosity as if it were a calf out past the fence that needed fetching. He took the flashlight from the hook, the heavy kind with a rubber grip, and checked the batteries the way a person checks their pulse. He told himself this was neighbor trouble, or a kid from town testing bravery on a Friday dare. He told himself this was what the night does to grown men when sleep holds them by the elbow and then lets go. He told Dinah, the old collie, to stay. She licked once, turned in a tight circle on the porch rug, and stayed. He crossed the yard, past the big maple that had survived lightning by pretending it hadn't happened, and stepped onto the headland by the north field. The first row took him in like a store's door chime. The stalks were tall and dry, leaves bent into knives. The ground was soft from last week's rain and held his boot prints as if for reference. He waited for the whistling. It came from farther in now, or the rows had changed the way sound bends when it's forced to choose a path. He chose a path. He took row 18, the one that ran with the slight slope and the way water teaches roots to drink. His father had run the planter careful this spring, GPS straight when the signal behaved, by eye when it didn't. Row 18 should have held like a rail, the stalks pressed against his sleeves. The flashlight beam drew clean wood into the dark leaves, bleaching white, silk like old hair, dirt a puzzle of last year's husks, and this year's pennies of mud. The whistling stopped. He stood still. His breath sounded like someone else's in the mask of leaves. He tasted dust. He listened until listening felt like a rope he had to keep from dropping. Farther north, down toward the low spot by the drainage tile, it started again, only louder, as if the person had turned their head and decided the audience was worth the effort. Merritt moved. 3 rows over, the tram line cut across, a packed strip where the sprayer had gone in June. He took it. The corn arched overhead, leaves flicking his ears. Spiders had slung long theories between stalks. He broke them and apologized in his head. He had walked this ground every day for months, and the ground had said yes like a friend. Tonight, it felt like a cousin, a person who loves you without being sure what to do with you. He reached the low spot. The field dipped and turned its face toward the tile that ran down to the ditch. The air was cooler here, lined with the smell of black earth that keeps secrets for centuries, because that's what it was paid to do. The whistling had gone softer. A trill rose up like someone trying to make light of an apology. Merritt swept the flashlight sideways. The beam caught the blue reflection of something small and glassy. He crouched. A marble. Blue, with a pale ribbon curled inside, half under a leaf. He touched it with one finger and felt the way glass feels when it learned patience waiting inside a pocket for its chance. He stood, and the beam hit another, green this time, lodged at the foot of a stalk. He put them both in his shirt pocket without thinking which pocket meant past and which meant present. "Hello," he said. The field appreciated the effort, if the small answering hush meant anything. He wasn't the kind of man who called out names into a place that did not have names to call back. He was the kind of man who waited and then took one more step, the way you do with cattle that have decided the gate is optional. He took one more step. The ground had a memory. His boots sank an inch, then two. He pulled up. The mud let go with a sound like a low laugh. The beam found a scuff in the soil that wasn't his. It had rained the day before, a polite rain that brightened the world and left. Tracks should be fresh. This mark had a sharpness to it he didn't like. He aimed the light again. The scuff came to a point. Not deer, not raccoon. A toe of a boot slid sideways and corrected because the body above that boot had decided to remain upright. The field held that story and did not mind telling it. The whistling kept on. It moved east. Merritt moved too, allowing the rows to push him into the old waterway nobody planted because it cost more to argue with a ditch than to go around. He hit the bank and paused. The sound was close enough now to feel the mouth that made it, the slight wet at the end of notes, the breath through teeth. Above the ditch, on the fence line, a scarecrow leaned into the moon like he had been invited. Merritt had dressed him in a flannel shirt in July to keep the birds from laughing outright. Now the shirt's checks looked like an argument. The hat had blown off sometime in August. The stake had a twist in it the way wood does when it was alive and insists on a personality after. The scarecrow whistled. Merritt's body did not move in the way of cartoon men. He did not jump. He did not fling the light so hard the beam went to the stars. He stood, the way a person stands when what he sees insists on being nothing but what it is. He put the light on the scarecrow's painted mouth. The paint was flaked, the smile wrong on purpose. His father's old gloves were nailed to the crosspiece, fingers bent into permanent work. The straw at the neck had learned the shape of wind and refused to unlearn it. The tune came again from behind the scarecrow, clipped by fence wire and field. He played the beam along the fence. This line had been his grandfather's. His father had repaired it across 3 winters, one staple at a time, using a hammer that had bent 100 nails and 100 more. Tonight, a single strand lay loose between posts, a neat cut at shin height made by someone who liked clean work. Beyond the fence, the other place. Neighbors in the country are closer than people in town and farther away. The acreage to the east had belonged to the Kesslers once, then to the bank, then to a man who installed irrigation pivots with a speed that made the county whisper. Then it's Saturday. The pivot circle kept a gargoyle symmetry in the daylight and turned to bones at night. The whistling came from inside that circle, not far, an invitation or a dare. Merritt climbed the fence by habit and dropped into the tall, ragged grass beyond. His flashlight skipped over metal. The pivot tower rose where the corn had been cut early for silage. A ladder led up to a catwalk that had not been used since a summer of drought and cheap diesel. The sky put someone else's stars over everything. Under the ladder sat a cooler the color of a toy, lid askew, ice melted into a cold thought. 2 bottles lay on their sides. The labels had lost interest in staying on. He touched one. The glass was warm, warmer than the air deserved. He called out again, a different word this time. "Friend." The whistling answered with the same run of notes. He followed the sound around the base of the pivot. His light found cobs gnawed down to the spindle by raccoons with principle. He found a folding chair with only 3 of its 4 screws willing. He found a playing card gone into the dirt, face down forever. He did not find a person. The corn from the other side rustled, a polite cough. He turned. A taller shadow leaned out from where 2 rows had been pushed apart. The flashlight found denim, boots, the hem of a coat cut square. A hand. The skin had the tint of rural men, year-round, sun-washed, wind-scoured. The fingers were long and still. The hand did not wave. "Evening," Merritt said. He stepped closer. The shadow stepped back. The hand slid into the rose, as if hiding from a photograph. The whistling receded down an aisle of stalks, clean and straight as a hallway. He went after it. Later, he would say he never chose to follow, and he would not count that as a lie. The rose insisted. The sound invited. The night did what it always does when a person leaves a safe light and enters a place built to fit bodies only one at a time. It made a mouth and decided whether to swallow or to speak. The field spoke directions in leaves. He followed until the path tried to teach him regret, and his feet refused to be taught. At the heart of the pivot circle, the ground sank another foot. He stumbled once, caught himself against a stalk so dry it cut his palm in a clean straight line. He swore, quietly, with vowels only. The whistling had slowed. It drew out a single note and hung it in the air as if asking him to name it. He named it Unkind. He turned off the flashlight. Dark held him like water does when you slide under and open your eyes. The field went black, then not. The sky had its thin light, the stars arranged their patient omissions. The rows were no longer alleyways, exactly. They were sentences. A breeze moved through and added commas. He stepped forward into a word, then another. The whistling stopped. He waited. He could hear the pivot tower creak, a metal thought adjusting. A truck moved way off on County 18, 3 miles at least. Tires with thick voices, a man's radio too loud in the cab because the night drives its price down for everyone. He waited until the waiting was its own problem. He reached for the flashlight. The beam hit denim again. Close. A shoulder. He yanked the light up and met a face. It was not a face he knew from today. It might have been a face from a photograph under glass at the county fair, past names, eyes poured in. The hat was the wrong cut for now and the right cut for when hats were more than hats. The eyes adjusted to light with the slow patience of a barn cat in a doorway. The mouth held a shape that wasn't a smile and wasn't what comes later. The cheeks were hollowed in, the way working men's cheeks sag when they finally let the day have them. "Don't," the man said, not loud. He lifted one finger the way a teacher does when she'd rather not get stern. "Don't shine." Merritt lowered the beam to the man's chest. The denim had a tag that read, "Kessler in faded thread," as if a mother had stitched it when mud was the usual weather. The man nodded, brief. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled the run again. The notes slid under the leaves and came back altered by straw and distance. "Had to see if you'd come," the man said. He did not offer his name. He did not ask Merritt's. The field did the introductions it believed in. The man tipped his chin toward the north, where the ditch had cut a new curve 2 springs ago, and nobody called the county because sometimes you let water take responsibility for its own choices. "Come on, then." They went up Row, across the tram line, down again. Merritt kept the light aimed at boots and dirt the way you aim swear words when children are sleeping in the next room. The man's hands brushed the tassels as he went, leaving no sound. The field learned him and forgot Merritt in the same breath. They crossed into the neighbor's back 40, and the soil changed, darker and more confident. The rows had more to say here. The whistling would come and go like a small animal, checking the air and disliking it. The man stopped at a patch where the stalks had been storm-bent and then righted themselves out of pride. He crouched, hand out, palm down on top of a flat stone that had no business on this ground. The stone was square. It held an iron ring in one corner. He tapped it. The sound returned like a jar lid. "Used to be a storm door," he said. "For the root cellar. They built the house up there." He flicked his eyes toward where the stars thinned and the silhouette of a ruined chimney picked its teeth on the horizon. "Tornado took it in 54, you know that." Merritt nodded. He had heard the story. The county leaned on that year. It changed the way people believe in roofs. 3 days after, the man said, setting his palm to the stone like a pledge, "My brother thought he heard whistling here. We believed him because he was the kind of boy who told the truth, even when it meant he had to walk back and fix something. He followed it. Everybody followed it. Men with boots and women with cakes and ropes and tubs and a feeling of the back of their necks being breathed on. We pulled the stone up, we brought lanterns. It goes under like a snake down there. The cellar does. We didn't find anyone. No boy, no breath, just apples rolling because that's what they do when people die. Things keep their job anyway. We closed it back up. Weather put a shoulder on it. And now, he stopped. The whistling came, this time from under their feet. It rose up through the stone like a trick, thin and mean and a little proud, a tune that went square, then wandered off the edge. The iron ring shook against its socket with a burr. Merritt felt the hair along his forearms ask for a vote. Now, the man said, it calls people here when it's time. He put his hand on the ring. I'm tired of it calling people here who are not me. He lifted. It did not rise much. The hinge had rusted itself into religion. The man looked at Merritt, not pleading, exactly, not persuading. He looked like a person offering you the end of a sentence the world has been running too long. Merritt set the flashlight down on its base and got his fingers under the corner. The stone was heavy-hearted, more weight than mass, the kind of weight that comes from being asked to hold back a story. They lifted together. It rose an inch, then two. It settled on a ridge of broken brick. The smell answered before the dark did. Apples, old and bitter, work that had gone on without supervision. Cold earth that had kept promises by crushing them. A draft moved across Merritt's knuckles. It took his body down a list to be sure each part remembered what stand means. The whistling ran up inside the gap and out. It had volume now. It wished it had a throat. It would have stopped if someone had blessed the night right then and said, go on to sleep. No one blessed the night. Merritt and the man held the stone a second longer, then eased it down onto a stick propped like a tired knee. The gap held. The dark inside threw itself at their eyes and bounced back, patient. They did not aim the flashlight in, the man would not have it, and Merritt knew enough to trust someone who belonged to a place this much. They listened instead. The whistling ran its tune twice, then twice again, and each time the final note sagged, as if asking someone to let it lie. Why me? Merritt asked. He wasn't offended by the question. He wanted a reason that could wear a hat. You were the one who heard it honest, the man said. You stayed at the edge of your field as long as you could and still came. Some men run because they want a story to tell about themselves. You came because you wanted to know who to go fetch. Merritt shoved down the part of himself that softened at that. He bent, slid his hand into the gap until his fingertips touched the dirt at the lip. It was cool, the way a basement never loses January. He searched by hand, careful for glass, nothing but pebbles and the slow grind of last century's lessons. The whistling faltered. It shortened itself and became 3 notes, those 3 notes he had heard at the kitchen window, the 3 his father had bent into the radio between ballgame innings, the 3 his grandfather had used to call a dog that never needed calling. He withdrew his hand and stood. The man had his head down, listening as if his bones were the receiving equipment. He began to hum, not the tune, but a harmony low and uninsistent. The whistling slowed. The cellar air came up wetter than before, fouled for a second by something like breath, and then clean. The whistling stopped. They waited a full minute, then another. Merritt counted, slow as if a child in a tent had asked him to promise monsters were on vacation. The ground under the stone was a fact again. The man let his harmony stop, the notes settling like a bird on a line, and then choosing not to stay. He knelt and pulled the stick, and the stone met its ledge with a sound like a chest closing. Sometimes, the man said into the calm, it wanted an argument. Sometimes it wanted somebody from back then to say his name and make a promise. It wanted a mother crying on the dirt. It wanted men with rope because rope makes everyone feel helpful. Not tonight. Tonight you came and you didn't carry any of that. You just listened harder than the field wants you to. That's enough. They stood together in the rows until the night got bored with them and went to do what the night does in other places. The pivot sighed and remembered it had bearings, not opinions. The ditch water moved on its way, not fast, not slow, never wrong. A coyote put a sentence into the air and another answered, and both sentences agreed to end where they did. The man tipped the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing and turned back into the corn. His boots made no more sound than a thought that knows its limit. Merritt found his way to his own side of the fence. The cut strand had not healed. Fences need hands. He climbed and dropped into dirt he had paid for with 3.5 decades of rain and frugal Sundays. The scarecrow leaned the same way. His flashlight picked out a nail that had worked proud where a glove met wood. He tapped it back in with the handle, the small sound a hope. On the porch, Dinah lifted her head and thumped her tail twice. He sat on the steps and watched the sky unspool its last thin silk. The clock over the stove in the kitchen read 1:42. A local freight passed through town without asking anyone's opinion. The night had its usual old chair smell. Merritt took the marbles from his pocket and rolled them in his palm. He did not take them in the house. He set them on the porch rail, two small moons that decided to belong to weather again. He slept in the chair by the door with the light over the sink left on because he was still old enough to do what his father had done and still young enough to want a reason for it. In the morning, his neighbor from across County 18 pulled into the drive with the casual angle of men who do not use turn signals because everybody already knows where they're going. Otho Vale had the kind of face that had learned to tolerate sunlight and other people's plans. He stepped out, looked toward the north field, then at the porch where the marbles caught the first slant. He paused. "Thought I heard it last night," Otho said, as if they'd been in the same dream and had already agreed on the parts to keep. "I didn't come. I was afraid if I went, I'd bring the wrong thing with me. You go." "I went," Merritt said. He poured coffee into a cup that had chipped the day his daughter drove away, with her car full and her eyes wider than they had any right to be. He handed the cup down. "There's a stone out there. You know it." Otho nodded. "Been there longer than you and me combined. Some things are a door, and some things are the breath you take before you knock." They sat without sitting, Otho leaning on the post, Merritt half on, half off the iron chair that had belonged to his wife's aunt, and squeaked like the first word of gossip. The morning took the night apart and put it away neatly. The field did what fields do after an event. It pretended nothing had happened and invited you to harvest. By 10, the co-op truck rumbled up, the driver wearing the resigned cheer of a man who deals in averages for a living. Merritt walked the headland with him, pointed at moisture readings that lied slightly, agreed to pretend the numbers were written on a blackboard by someone with authority. He did the work. He did it until the work forgave him for wondering what else he might be supposed to do. That evening, he repaired the fence where the strand had been cut. He pulled it tight and stapled it with his grandfather's hammer because you use the tools that know your hands. He hammered in 3 staples and left one in his pocket so the fence would remember there is always one more job and it can't get cocky. He checked the pivot base out of courtesy to the machine. He replaced nothing. He spoke to no one. The sky went red behind weather stacked to the west, Kansas doing its job of sending clouds as if on purpose. For a week, the field behaved. The wind laid down its sheet music neatly. The coupe truck counted out grain like blessings. He slept at the proper times and did not wake to odd hours with the feeling of someone whistling at the edge of his life. The marbles stayed on the porch rail until a grackle knocked one off and it rolled into the peony bed and took up residence there like a kindness. The other slid into the pocket of his jacket and made friends with a nickel and a screw. On the 9th night, just after the 10 o'clock news told its last hurries, he heard the 3 notes again quiet, like acknowledgement, not summons. He walked out to the north edge and stood with his hands in his jacket, listening. The breeze had a bite, the first hard frost would be soon. He unlocked the gate at the lane and left it open for an hour, for no reason at all anyone else would endorse. He closed it again out of habit and walked back slowly, because a person should walk slowly sometimes or the land will feel cheap. He did not go back to the stone unless the sound asked, and it did not. He did, however, leave a small jar on the porch rail next to where the marbles had Saturday. It held nails, the good kind, old, with heads like pennies. Every day when he came home, he put one in his pocket, and every day when he went out after supper, he took one back to the fence line and put it in a coffee can under the scarecrow's torn shirt. Nobody told him to. He liked the weight exchange. He liked that fences need reminding and that the world is not improved by a man who ignores a slack line because his thoughts are more interesting. October reached both hands across the month and pulled. The trucks came and went. The harvest went well enough that he stopped thinking about what could have been If it had rained 4 more afternoons in August, he slept, he woke. The whistling did not return in any way that made him leave his chair. He began to tell himself he had imagined a portion of it, as a man will do when a thing does not ask for money or apologies. Near Halloween, his daughter called from Cedar Rapids, a night shift at the hospital, voice folded with fatigue and the kind of joy that remembers to leave room for the day. He told her about the fence and the harvest and the brakes squeal on the auger wagon that he had decided to live with until January. He did not tell her about the cellar. He would, maybe, when she brought the little boy down for Thanksgiving and they stood by the ditch and talked about frogs like a miracle. He would, maybe, if the field asked them both. In late November, after the last corn went into the bin and the bin talked in its sleep, the county put on its winter color. The field showed ribs, the ditch showed its honest bottom. The wind took one of the scarecrow's gloves, and Merritt did not replace it because some things are beautiful at half done. He walked every line of his ground one afternoon with the sun low and the temperature willing. At the fence, by the pivot circle, under the coffee can where he had been giving the fence its nails, he found a small thing. A train ticket for a child, maybe, not used. Edges scrolled by, damp and patience. The print read, Nevada to Ames, 2 bits. He turned it over. On the back, someone had written 3 notes the way some people know and others never will, little ovals marching up and down a ladder of lines. The ink had migrated slightly into the paper, the way memories do in older heads. He put the ticket in his pocket with the nickel and the screw and the marble that had refused the peony bed. He looked toward the stone without moving his face much, because a person does not want to give a field reason to brag. He said thank you into his jacket as if the cloth were a helper. He walked home. Winter did what it does. It scoured the county down to the essentials. It made the roads into suggestions and the kitchen into a chapel. It put the sound of the furnace into his bones and the number of snow shovels in the garage into a bigger argument than necessary. The whistling came once or twice in a blow that turned the mailbox into a hooded thing, and when it did, he stood at the window and let it be. The way you let a neighbor sing one verse of a song you only half like because he is your neighbor, and you hope the reverse is also true. When spring returned, hesitant and then reckless, he walked out to the stone once in daylight. He stood there like a person does when he's about to open a letter he has already read. He put his hand on the iron ring, and the ring chose not to move. He felt only cool metal and the idea of a door. He said the name of the boy he thought must have once practiced whistling there, not loud, not soft. He thanked the man with the Kessler tag for nothing and for everything. He went home and planted, because that is the part of the story a farm writes to remind itself the ending belongs to the ground and the beginning belongs to the same. If you ever hear 3 notes carry clean from a field at midnight, and you are the kind of person who can tell the difference between wind and a message, remember this. The first step into the rose is a promise. Don't make it if you intend to perform yourself for the dark. Bring only your boots, your breath, and your willingness to be the person who will go fetch, not the person who will tell about fetching. Don't shine your light straight into old places unless someone who belongs to them asks you to. Lay your hand flat on what needs closing. When a tune that has wandered too long finds its last note, let it. When a door that has been heavy learns again how to rest, do not hire that door for different work. There are states where cornfields wear their ghosts like belts. There are ditches whose water knows the names people set into it. There are stones that have been held down by weather and held up by stories. There are men who can whistle and men who cannot, and both kinds do well if they listen. And sometimes, in a county that owes as much to wind as to family, a man with a flashlight and an old dog asleep on the porch will follow a tune into the rose and come back, having left something that doesn't need his hands anymore. When he sits down again, the chair will squeak in the key the field prefers. The kitchen clock will softly argue with the refrigerator about seconds. The night will soften him on its slow wheel. The next day, someone will wave on County 18 without lifting a hand, and the answer will come back exactly right. And somewhere beyond the line where 2 quarters meet under a fence, a stone will find it easier to be a stone because 2 men lifted it once, together, and then set it down the way the land asked. She bought a storage unit. The tape inside explains. She bought the storage unit on a wind-pushed Saturday in early October, the kind of day when flags along the frontage roads snapped like polite warnings and the auctioneer's voice carried clean across the lot. The place was called Milepost Storage, just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, a long row of corrugated doors facing a strip of prairie that kept trying to become a parking lot. She was not a flipper by trade. She was a librarian who liked old paper and lost letters. Her name was Leora Penn, and she raised her hand on a hunch when the auctioneer said the original renter had defaulted contents as is, cash only. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2020, that long elastic year that stretched and snapped and stretched again. Leora had a quiet car with a trunk that clicked shut like a punctuation mark. She had a brother named Finch who texted her thrift store photos like fortunes. She had a mother in assisted living who remembered questions but not answers. And now, for $430, she also had Unit B, 17, 6x10 dust inscription on the floor like an abandoned sentence. The auction staff cut the lock. The door went up with a skipped beat rattle. A smell slid out that was not quite mildew and not quite time. The light, sweet rot of cardboard and old leather. Inside, 3 banker's boxes labeled with a hand that pressed too hard. 1 wardrobe box crumpled along one spine. A busted desk lamp with a brass gooseneck shaped like a question about to be asked. A milk crate of records with sleeves that had forgotten how to hold themselves. And on top of everything, as if someone had said it last and with a decision, a small gray cassette player with a built-in speaker and a rectangle of yellow tape across its lid. On the tape, block letters in Sharpie, "Play me first." The wind moved in the alley between the units and made the metal doors talk to each other. Leora crouched in the rectangle of shade, thumb hesitating for the length of one breath, then pressed the play button. At first, there was only hiss, then a rustle that could have been a sleeve or a curtain, then a man's voice testing his own name like a microphone check. "This is Calder March," he said. "If you found this, you probably also found the rest. Please listen to the whole thing before you throw anything away. I am not saving myself here. I am trying to return what does not belong to me." The date is June 23rd, 2003. The place is Driftwood Storage on Route 49 outside Amarillo. I am saying that out loud, so when the tape gets copied and mislabeled, I can still put the world back where it goes. The sound of a chair leg grumbled against concrete. Papers shuffled. A small metronome of tapping began and stopped. The man took a breath that had a weight in it. "I fixed pianos for 20 years. Churches. Schools. People with money who thought sound was furniture. In '97, I started keeping a log of every instrument that had a story stuck in it. By story, I mean the thing you hear when the room gets quiet and the wood remembers. Don't roll your eyes. If you have never heard cedar explain itself at midnight, that is not my fault." Leora smiled despite herself. She didn't know why she had nearly laughed. Maybe because the voice was so unembarrassed by its own certainty. She adjusted the little volume wheel, the speaker fuzzed, then settled. "I am recording this in a storage unit for a reason," Calder said. "There is a Baldwin Acrosonic in here with its fallboard down and its keys covered by a towel that used to be jade green. On top of it is a shoebox with the words 'Keep for Jaspers' written in pencil. I took that box from a house that was being cleared in a hurry. I told myself I was keeping it safe. I told myself I'd hand it back when the time was better. That was 8 years ago. The time never got better. It got brighter and louder, and then it got mean, and the box stayed under my bed like a small dog that thinks it has permission. Today, I am putting it where it belongs, which is somewhere a person can choose it or not choose it without me choosing for them." The tape clicked. He continued, "If you are Jaspers, or you loved one, or you know one, please keep what matters and toss the rest. Just know this first. The shoebox contains letters between 2 people who met at night school at Tulsa Community in 1974. Their names were Odell Frost and Evo Jaspers. He was 20 and thought he was already late. She was 24 and tired in a way a person shouldn't be at 24. They wrote like the world was going to let them live wherever they set the words down. The letters stopped just before Christmas, 1976. The reason is not a twist. It is the average tragedy. She got sick and then sicker. He did not know how to write to a sickness that took her mouth away. The last letter is his to her. He mailed it 3 days after the funeral. The envelope came back rubber-stamped, forwarding order expired. It sat in a house for 2 decades until I was tuning the family's Kimball, and they told me to set aside anything sentimental for the dumpster. And you see, I have a dumb belief that paper should be read before it is burned. A gust pushed gravel down the row like a handful of beads. Leora paused the tape and looked into her unit, as if the boxes could confirm this story. She set the player on the wardrobe box and lifted the top of the nearest banker's box. Receipts. Polaroids with the color cooled to a vintage sadness. A folded travel map with lines drawn like veins between Amarillo and Tulsa. The milk crate of records gave up a Carole King sleeve, rumors with a coffee ring, a gospel record from a church in Sepulpa. The cassette player droned a faint motor whine as if it were eager to continue. She pressed play. Ivo, Calder said, shifting into the second person, like someone who has been telling a story too long to keep pretending he isn't inside it. If you're listening, I kept something that was not mine because I thought the world would eat it. I am an idiot in exactly that way. I am also your accomplice now if you want me. In the bottom of the box, you'll find a tape that isn't this one. It is labeled December 27th, and you can guess the year. It is her, Odell. The last night, she felt up to getting her voice into a machine. She didn't tell you because she didn't think the machine could hold the shape she wanted to say to your face. I don't think machines can hold shapes either, but sometimes they keep the outline well enough that a person can fill it in. If you would rather not hear it, don't. Burn it and say a kind word and go make a sandwich. If you would, then sit and be ready to forgive yourself after. Whatever you do, don't listen driving. Ask me how I know. Leora's hands moved before her mind did. She slid the wardrobe box aside and hauled the banker's boxes out into the light. The tape ran. Calder cleared his throat once, then offered one last breadcrumb. I am going to leave this unit with rent paid for 6 months. I'm leaving the desk lamp that looks like it belonged to someone who wanted to read long after the room gave up. I am leaving the Baldwin cupboard, which is disrespectful to instruments and necessary for dust. If you are not Ivo or Ken and you opened this and felt a tug, maybe you are the kind of person who opens doors in museums you're not supposed to open. I can't stop you. But if you take the tape, take the box too. Stories get lonely if you split them. All right? That is me done. I'm going to label this Play Me First and lock up. I will drive to a diner where the coffee tastes like someone loved it an hour ago, and I will not look back. Good night. The tape wheezed to a stop and stayed there with its little spools paused, like eyes that had decided to blink and stuck. Leora ejected it. The cassette was the cheap clear kind with gray hubs, a bite taken out of one corner like a mark from a nervous jaw. She set it aside carefully and went to work on the shoebox in the bottom of the second banker's box. There it was, the penciled Keep for Jaspers, in a hand that had tried to write neatly when it wanted to run. The lid resisted at first with that dry hiss cardboard makes when it has sealed to itself. She slid a fingernail under and lifted. On top, letters in a stack, rubber band fossilized to a brittle loop, and then snapped quietly when her thumb found it. Dates in the corners. 1974 in April. 1975 with summer still in the stamp. A ticket stub to a cinema that no longer existed. A brochure for night classes with prices that looked like jokes now. And at the bottom, as promised, a cassette slid against the rough cardboard and knocked once. Leora lifted it out. The label was crooked. December 27th, the year written very small. 1976. Her hands were not shaking, but they were listening. Her car's dash still had a tape deck because she had refused to trade it in for a newer something that didn't have teeth for music. She almost walked to the car. Then she stopped because a voice in her head sounded suspiciously like Calder's caution about driving and hearing a thing that bent your understanding of what sound can hold. She looked around for an outlet. The storage office would have one, but the manager had retreated with his clipboard and his coffee to the room with the little TV. Leora picked up the cassette player. A miracle. It had batteries. She grinned at an object in 2020 that ran on forgiveness and double A's. She set the old player on her trunk, fed the tape in with a care the machine rewarded by accepting it smoothly, and pressed play. Hiss, the slow wind of old magnetism waking. A distant clink like a glass set on tile. Then a woman's voice that arrived the way snowfall sometimes arrives in a drought, soft first, then unapologetic. Evo Jaspers, she said, you told me never to record because I try to edit my life when there is a red light. I am ignoring you because not everything we decide together should stay decided. It is the 27th. Christmas is done with me. I am done with it. I wore the scarf you bought, even though it makes me look like a librarian from a story where the librarian unbuttons her blouse at the end and chooses a wild life. Stupid scarf, perfect scarf. I loved it. I am sitting at the kitchen table, and I can hear the refrigerator think, you always say refrigerators think too much, and look how the milk tastes of thinking. The voice was not shaky. It had the kind of steadiness that is not bravado, but a gift a person gives to the people listening. Odell breathed in as if drawing a line she wished were longer. I am not going to make it to spring, she said in the tone of someone admitting they are not going to make it to a movie on time. Nothing tragic in my voice, love. I am trying to keep the tragedy in my hands on this table. I want to put them down gently so they do not wake anyone. I am not afraid. That is not bravery. The body is tired, like a clock, that has been asked to keep time for a dance that went one song too long. What I am is greedy. I want more of you. I want to watch you learn how you stand when there is a child at your hip and a skillet on the stove and a song in your head. I want to hear your temper forgive your mouth. I want to finish organizing the Broken Spine novels at the bookstore, even though we both know I only work there to borrow sentences and put them back. But a person doesn't get to want and get in the same breath. Leora leaned against the car and closed her eyes for a count that surprised her with its length. The lot around her had its own noise, the rattle of a chain on a flagpole, a truck lugging in second, a crow that had lost its patience with something on the fence, but the voice made those sounds pat themselves on the head and promise to be quiet. You asked me once what I wanted you to do if I left first, Odell went on. I said remarry and be happy, because that is what you are supposed to say if you do not want to be accused of clutching. I have a different answer now, and I am allowed to revise because I am still here with breath in my pocket. I want you to put a box in a place where a stranger could find it, with instructions that say, take what you need. Not because I think romance belongs in thrift shops, but because the world seems to pass its tenderness along that way. We pay attention to what we do not expect to find. We pick up what someone else set down and we think, oh, I get to decide two lives right now, mine and theirs. It makes us more careful with both. She laughed, that short, violent laugh people make when they almost cry and disagree with their face about it. If you find this after I am gone, congratulations on your snooping. You love me enough to live in my kitchen after my kitchen belongs to dust. You love me enough to put your ear to a machine when it would be easier to put your head in a pillow. I will not say do not be sad. Be as sad as you please. Be ridiculous with it for a while. Wear your sadness out like shoes on a long walk, and then when they have holes in them, throw them away and go barefoot for a month. But promise me you will buy new shoes when the weather turns. Promise me you will keep a stove fuel canister in your car because someday you will offer it to a stranger at a trailhead, and this will be the way the world returns. Something I am stealing right now by leaving. The tape made a small, warbly sound as the tension shifted, then continued. Listen to me bossing you around, Odell said, fond exasperation in the syllables. I am going to put this tape in a box with letters you never saw. You called me a magpie when we met, and look, all I have collected are words and ticket stubs. The letters are mostly me, because you hated writing on paper that did not have music staves, and you did not think words would stay put if they could not sit on bars. The last letter is yours. You wrote it inside your head, and will write it later with a pen. The pen will do its best, the paper will do its best. Here is the part I cannot make neat. I want you to leave the box somewhere you do not own. A storage unit, a church basement, the free shelf in the back of the bookshop. Somewhere a person has to choose to look twice. She paused, and the tape sighed with her. The thing you always say about pianos is in my head, she murmured. That they carry the memory of every hand that asked them to be more than wood. I don't know what I am asking you to be. More than wood, less than a shrine, something that can be picked up and put down without breaking. You are good at that. Your hands know how to pass a thing. The end of the tape came with a soft click, like a door catching. Silence fell with dignity. Leora stood in the concrete wind, the cassette player ticking to itself, and realized she had been holding her breath in a way that made her chest feel like a drawer that didn't want to open. She exhaled and felt the world get its shape back around her. The storage yard's manager had wandered out to smoke and had stopped in the doorway, watching her kindly from behind his own weather. He raised his chin in that American way that means, "Do you need another person, or should I go pretend not to see you?" She shook her head and put her palm on the trunk as if the metal could read it. The letters in the shoebox were not neat. They were fierce. They were church and break room and bus stop and laundromat. They were written on grocery lists and margins of community college handouts and the backs of band flyers. They smelled like every hand that had held them, plus cedar dust and a sweetness that might have been someone's perfume from a life that had learned to be generous with its molecules. Leora read the first one standing there in the wind and then had the sense to stop. Some reading needs a table, a glass of water, and a chair that learned patience. She loaded the car with a librarian's Tetris, slid the cassette player into the passenger footwell where others might put a tiny dog, paid the auction manager who counted cash with a resigned gratitude, and drove to the house where nobody waited for her, the kind of vacancy that makes room for new things and also makes the old ones echo. Night arrived in the square way it arrives in October on the plains. Leora made tea and wrapped her mother's Afghan around herself in a way that would have made her mother tut with approval. She set the shoebox on the kitchen table and arranged the tapes and letters like she was about to catalog them and would not be punished if she took her time. She allowed herself 3 letters, then the rest tomorrow. It became 4, then 5, then midnight, then 1 in the morning with the lamp glass warm and the tea cold. Odell wrote like a sparrow sings, plain and suddenly cruel with truth. I have not learned how to trust a day that stays good, she wrote in early summer. And then, in late autumn, I am practicing believing you when you say soup counts as dinner. She wrote about the bookstore where old men argued kindly about baseball and pretended to forget to leave so they could be told to stay. She wrote about the night school classroom that smelled like pencils and tired. She wrote about a piano in a church basement with 2 keys that hung back like shy children, and the way Ivo tuned them like he was begging the room to promise to be itself. Ivo appears in the margins of the letters, the way the person a letter is written to appears without ever entering the room. He is funny the way people are funny when they are not trying. He is a fixer of everything except his own habit of leaving tools where he used them last. He wants a straight answer from the future and refuses to ask the question politely. He plays blues in E and refuses to apologize. He brings home oranges when money says no because the taste of an orange is the opposite of a mistake. The last letter was his, and Leora saved it for the last. Don't make it tidy, she told herself, and read it anyway with a kind of fear that felt like jumping into water she already knew was cold. Odell, he wrote, the loop of his J from her surname cutting clean across the top line. Today, the mailbox understood time better than I did. It gave me back the envelope I had paid to send. I am grateful to a thing that has no mouth. I am writing this in the room where you laughed at me for liking a rug with so many flowers it looked like the rug was trying too hard. The rug is trying less hard without you. Everything is. I put your scarf on the back of the chair you always refused to let the cat sleep on, and the cat sat there for an hour, mad as a relative. I do not know how to be a person. Yesterday I did, and I expected to today, and look, I will try again tomorrow because you made me promise to be stupid with trying. I am putting a shoebox where the world can trip over it. If a stranger finds it, I hope they are the kind who is brave enough to open things that are not theirs and gentle enough to put them back. I hope they write to tell me so I can stop pretending the box is a secret and call it what it is, a return. He had signed only Ivo and then smaller. Forgive me for not getting there in time for the last joke you told that wasn't funny. I would have laughed if you had asked me to, but I am glad you didn't ask me to. Leora slept in the chair with the Afghan around her shoulders and the tape player on the table like a small guardian that had learned to keep watch without being asked. Morning came with a plainness that felt like a blessing. She woke, poured new tea, and wrote on a note card with firm letters that made the pen behave. To anyone named Jaspers connected to Odell Frost. Please call. Then she paused, took a breath, and replaced the word call with write. She did not know why until later, when the answer came folded in an envelope that smelled like someone's drawer. She found Ivo in the only way some people can be found now, by a trail of mentions that led to an obituary that did not brag. He had died in 2011 in a house where the cat had once slept on a chair. The obituary had the names of a sister and her two sons, a line about the instruments he had tuned for churches that might not have known what generosity costs, and a sentence that made Leora grip the paper. Survived also by the music he never got to write and the people who played what he fixed. The sister lived in Ponca City then. A search produced a different address in Bartlesville now. Leora wrote the note card anew and set it under a magnet on her refrigerator to stare back at her while she did dishes and decided if it was her place. 2 days later, she mailed a letter with the caution and audacity of a person who has to cross a room to hand a stranger back their own past. She included a copy of Calder's label in the corner because she wanted to prove that intention can be inherited. She waited. Waiting learned her name and sat down in her kitchen with its patient lamp. In a week and 2 days, an envelope arrived with a stamp that had been placed on at a slight angle, the way a person with a careful hand becomes human at the last second. The return address said Jaspers, and Leora sat down on the rug and read with her back against the pantry door. Dear Miss Penn, it began in a slanted script. My name is Anza Jaspers. I am Ivo's niece. I do not know how you got my address, but if you did it politely, I will thank you instead of yell. My uncle used to say, if you make a thing and put it in the world, you do not get to decide how it travels. I am relieved he is right. I know about Odell because I am named after her. He told my sister and me her story when we turned 12 so we would not confuse romance with rescue, and he told it again when we turned 20 so we would not confuse grief with identity. He had a box. We never saw inside it. He kept it under his bed like a grudging god. When he got sick, he told me there was a man named Calder who once did a kindness and a theft at the same time, and that someday the box might return the slow way. If it came, he wanted me to write back to the person who carried it, so I am writing. Tell me what you have. Tell me what you want me to do. If this is a joke, I will forgive you, because it would not be a funny one. Leora wrote back with copies of the first pages, careful not to let her own hunger make her rude. She offered to drive. Anza wrote back the next day with a time and a pot roast menu, as if there were no other way to do this than to feed someone. The drive to Bartlesville took the length of an album and a half, which is not how a librarian measures time, but this time it was. The clouds lay low and thin like a sheet pulled over a lamp. Leora parked in front of a house with white trim that looked like it had been painted by a person who knows how to steady a brush by leaning against the ladder. The door opened before Leora knocked. A woman in her 40s stood with her hands already out, not for an embrace, but for a receipt that weighed more than the shoebox. Behind her, a man waved from the kitchen. The smell of onions and thyme made everything gentler. Anza was the kind of person whose face tells you 50 stories before her mouth says one. She took the box and set it on the table and did not open it for a full minute. Then she did. Her mouth moved, a little, not because she was trying to speak, but because a person's lips sometimes learn to read when their eyes cannot keep up. They listened to the tape at the table with hands flat on the wood, not because anyone asked them to, but because it felt like a way to offer stillness to Odell's voice. When the part came about being ridiculous with sadness and wearing it out like shoes, Anza laughed the small laugh of a person who recognizes the flavor of the advice. He said that, she murmured. He said it like he was inventing the metaphor in front of us, and I have a tape of the original. The room held that sentence like it was catching something fragile. They ate pot roast with pieces of potato that had learned the taste of everything else in the pan. They drank coffee that was new enough to forgive any conversation. They opened the box and took out letters with their hands, like museum workers without gloves. They spoke names like they were calibrating a piano, tuning each syllable until it answered back. That night, Leora drove home under a sky that pretended to be empty and was not. She left the radio off so the car could hear what the night was doing. She slept and dreamed of a storage unit that kept changing its door color, and every door she opened was a different past returning itself. She woke with the taste of dust in her mouth and did not mind. In the weeks that followed, the box lived a second life in a house that understood how to host it. Anza read a letter a day out loud at the table with the window cracked and the dog asleep under her feet. She wrote Leora small updates. Today I learned how Odell laughed at my uncle's fear of oranges. Today I learned that night school used to smell like chalk and resolve. Today I learned that a person can fit a year inside a paragraph and still find room for the weather. Calder's name became a project. They wanted to thank him and did not know how to find his breath in the web. Leora tried phone directories from Amarillo with her librarian stubbornness. She found 3 Calder marches that were not him and one who had moved 2 years prior with no forwarding address. She found a piano tuner's business listing with a disconnected number. She turned to a stack of clippings and found, in a small column with a blurry photo, a mention of a memorial for a Calder M in a church that had bad lighting and kind carpet. The date was 2007. The photo showed a pair of hands holding a felt strip and a tuning hammer. The caption did not brag. A life, it suggested, that had done work and left the room better. Anza wrote a letter anyway. She wrote it as if it were going to be read out loud to a person who could not afford to be bothered unless the bother was beautiful. She mailed it to the church. She mailed one to the storage facility in Amarillo in case anyone there had inherited the story. She put one in a book at the free library on her block, tucked into a copy of a novel nobody seems to want when they need it and everybody wants when they have room. She addressed one to no one, put no stamp on it, and tucked it in the shoebox under the letters. In December, Snow performed its first attempt, failed, and tried again with a more persuasive voice. Leora went to visit her mother, who held her hand, and asked her what year it was, with a tone that admitted timelines are slippery now. Leora said it aloud, 2020, and then, when her mother smiled at the neatness of the numbers, Leora added, "It is also Tuesday afternoon and you like soup." Her mother nodded, satisfied by specifics. Leora read to her from one of Odell's letters. Her mother, who had always loved women who refused not to be clever, laughed once and said, "Tell her to write more." "I'll tell her," Leora said, and did not correct the tense. On the last day of the year, a small package arrived on Leora's porch in weather that could not decide whether to rain. It was wrapped in brown paper with string, old-fashioned on purpose and not by necessity. The return address was a music shop in Amarillo that smelled, when she opened the door, of rosin and hope. Inside the box, a cassette labeled in a different hand. It said simply, "Driftwood." Then, a date in 2003. A note was tucked in. "You do not know me," it read. "I run the counter at the place where Calder used to buy strings cheap and swear under his breath that the new strings had no patience. We found this in a drawer where the receipts go to forget their names. He left it here the week the storage unit auctioned off his things. He told me to hold it for a person who would ask nicely. No one did. Maybe you are that person." She put the tape into the player with a care that made the table hear it. The hiss began like a tide. Calder's voice arrived. Older or tired, she couldn't tell. He spoke as if he had skipped the first parts he usually said because he felt he owed a different kind of sentence. If this is Leora, or Anza, or someone else kind who made room for a box to travel, listen. I wanted to write a clever instruction for how to put things back. I do not have one. The closest I have is this. When you find a story mid-sentence, do not add your name to the end like a signature. Put your name small in the margin as a witness. Then hand the page to the person whose life it is and let them choose their own pen. He laughed softly, like a man who had decided to stop scolding himself and was enjoying the quiet. The Baldwin in Unit B17 has a hairline crack in the bridge that will not keep it from speaking if someone loves it anyway. Pianos are like that. People are like that. You will think you have to fix the crack to deserve the music. You do not. You will think the crack is the point. It is not. The point is that the thing still says what it came to say. The tape ended without drama. Leora sat in her kitchen with the shoebox open and the lights soft and the winter outside, pretending it would not ask for more heat. She took out Odell's last tape and listened again, not to study, but to keep a promise to let a voice use the room. She held the letters that had traveled across years, and storage fees and dust and a man's guilt. She smiled down a hallway of time toward a piano she would never see. In February, Anza sent a photo. It was the Baldwin, its towel folded and placed properly, its fallboard up, a vase of eucalyptus on the far end because some leaves talk quieter and longer than flowers. The caption said, "It holds tune better than it should." Anto would have called that grace. The next photo was a child's hand, Anza's daughter, pressing middle C like a doorbell. The next, a dog asleep under the bench. Spring learned its way up from the soil. Leora took the empty cardboard from her unit to the paper recycling, and the man there told her his mother had kept a box of napkins with love notes on them that the family found when the house had to forget them. People put thoughts anywhere, he said, and laughed a little as if proud of humanity's mess. She kept the cassette player. She kept the first tape that said, "Play me first," and the second that said December 27th because some objects become addresses. She kept a copy of one letter that had a sentence she recited on days when the library had more books than hands and more requests than hours. The sentence was Odell's, and it said, "I do not write to be wise. I write to leave a door open in case someone needed that exact door today." On a June morning, with thunder stacked like books no one had time to read, Leora pulled into milepost storage for the last time. She slid her unit door up, empty, except for the desk lamp that curved its brass neck, and asked if she was sure. She plugged it in and turned it on, and the light made a small pool on the concrete like a confession. She left it on for a minute because objects appreciate ceremony even when they pretend not to. Then she turned it off, marked the unit clean on the clipboard with a pen attached by a chain, and dropped the key into a mouth that had swallowed thousands before. On the drive home, she passed a church sign that had not changed its advice since she was small. Be kind. Everyone is fighting a hard battle. She would have rolled her eyes at 12. She nodded at 40. At a stoplight, a man held a cardboard square with letters that tried to be neat. "Need help," it said, and then smaller. "Not a bad man, just a broke one." She handed him the rest of her change and a bottle of water she had known would be asked of her eventually. His thank you had the shape of a person accustomed to sudden doors. Years later, when her mother's memory folded itself like a map and slipped into a drawer that did not belong to any room, Leora took the box of letters to the assisted living and read them aloud on Tuesdays. Not all of them. Some are private and stayed private. Enough that a circle of women who had once been harsher with themselves than they deserved sat a little easier in their chairs and made the kinds of noises women make when a sentence lands where the body keeps its truest things. One afternoon, a woman who seldom spoke said softly, "Put a box in a place where a stranger could find it," and then laughed like a girl about to run. If you are listening to this story, there is probably a door near you. A cupboard, a glove compartment, a drawer that has learned patience by becoming cluttered. Somewhere in your town, there is a shelf where someone has left what they could not keep, and someone else will take what they did not know they needed. If you have a tape player, wind a tape with your finger and feel the old physics still answer. If you only have your voice, use it in a room at 2 in the morning and see if the wood answers. If you have a box, consider putting it where a stranger could find it. Write on the lid in pencil so the world knows it can edit. There was no twist here. No ghost in the unit except the ordinary one that lives in paper and insists on teaching us how to carry each other a little farther down the hall. The man who took what was not his did not profit. He apologized. The woman who wrote did not survive long enough to call it a memoir. She survived long enough to call it a door. The man who loved her grew old and kept tune. The people who came after learned the shape of falling in love with strangers and the more difficult shape of giving the thing back. And so, if it is late where you are and the house has stopped making its usual noises, pour water into a glass and notice the sound it makes when it hits the bottom, hollow turning to full. Think of a box under a bed. Think of a storage unit with a label you can't resist. Think of a piano with a hairline crack that still sings like itself. Think of a sentence in a letter that arrives in a year you needed it, from a person who never knew your name and said it anyway by accident. Then stand, walk to whatever door you have, and leave it open for one slow, careful minute, just long enough for someone who needs exactly that door today to find their way through. Her phone pinged at a grave with her name. The notification bloomed on her screen the moment her shoes left the gravel and slid onto the soft path between moss-dark stones. A small bell chime, bright as glass. A banner at the top. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. The words sat there as calmly as a weather app, as if the city had decided to label her the way it labels a bridge or a square. The place was Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Spanish moss hung in long, steady sentences from the live oaks. The river kept its secrets behind the bluff and breathed like a sleeping room. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in early November, the air cool enough to make her wish for sleeves and warm enough to forgive her for forgetting them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Edeni Hale, 28. She worked in visitor services at a small maritime museum upriver, the kind of job that made her memorize the angles of ships and the dates when storms came ashore. She liked fonts and quiet, and the sound salt makes drying on stone. She was visiting Bonaventure because her friend Anson had flown in from Minneapolis for a long weekend, and the two of them liked places that let you feel your breath in your mouth. The year was 2021. Phones knew where you were within decent intimacy. Some headstones wore small plaques with codes that asked to be scanned and promised a story. They had parked on Bonaventure Road under an oak that had learned to be older than most houses. The sky was simple, a clean coin of light. The volunteer at the office had given them a paper map and a soft-voiced list of locations worth the walk if you wanted your day to hold. Look for the little angels facing east. Find the section where the camellias keep blooming against instruction. There's a family plot that feels like a room you shouldn't step into without knocking. No one mentioned a notification. Edeni stared at her phone. The banner did not give a location like Section F or Plot 31. It was the same tag her calendar used when she arrived at work or home. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. As if she were a place. As if the grave were her. Anson leaned toward the screen and squinted. He was tall and light-footed, a teacher of high school literature who carried poems in his pockets like receipts. He read the banner and then her face and made a small arranging motion with his hands, the way he does when he wants to place humor where fright is trying to sit. That's a bug, he said, not unkindly. Or a geofence you made and forgot. Did you tell your phone to remind you to be yourself today? She clicked the banner to see where the phone thought she belonged. A map opened, a blue dot pulsed with the steady patience of a small heartbeat. A gray pin sat 100 feet east in a section labeled McAllister. The pop-up bubble above the pin read Edeni Hale in the same unsentimental font. She did not have a virtual contact called a cemetery. She had not created a reminder to arrive at her own name. The phone had decided the path curled between stones with dates that made you speak them out loud, because numbers are easier to hold when they come through the mouth. 1873, 1920, 2009. The Oaks leaned as if sold on the idea that the living need rehearsal space. Anson spoke a tour fact about a poet who loved this place and whose plaque visitors touch in a small, quick superstition. Edeni nodded because liking facts is a way of staying steady. Her pocket shook again. Another chime, the same banner. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. She breathed the way the yoga teacher on the internet tells you to. In through a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 6. They followed the path east until the bluff opened its shoulder and let the wind test their sleeves. The section ahead was a little higher, a little more sure of itself. A plot enclosed by low stone, dressed in ivy, sat beneath a live oak that looked like a table that had decided to grow legs. In the center stood a headstone gray as rain, taller than Edeni's shoulder. The name at the top held Edeni Hale. She stopped. You might have stopped too. Her name was not common. Her mother had found it in a book of Old English names and liked the way it sounded like a promise made under a tree. She had never met another Edeni. To see the letters in this order on stone felt like stepping into a movie where you have lines you did not audition for. Anson's hand found her elbow without a show of it. He had the sense not to say, wow, or are you kidding? He stood with her and let the river finish a sentence neither of them had started. The dates carved below the name were the first clean relief, 1974 to 2014, not hers. A woman 2 decades older, gone 7 years now. Under the dates, a line that read as Keeper of the Keys. The stone carried a small oval of glazed photo, a face with hair tucked back, eyes steady, a glint of a key ring at the edge of the frame. The oval was rubbed to a shine from fingers, the way love polishes small things while refusing to say it is love. On the right-hand corner of the stone, someone had bolted one of the new plaques with its little square of patterns. Scan to learn more. People who love story cannot resist a square that holds one. Ideni lifted her phone and let the camera see. A link opened without asking for anything. A page built by a memorial service company bloomed. At the top, the name again. Below, a small biography. A life lived with habits, upright and kind. A childhood in Chatham County, a long run as cemetery sexton. The last line read in a voice that felt like a woman sitting on a step with a mug and a warning and a grin. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. While she read, the phone hummed again. Not a banner this time. A little circle pulsing at the top of the screen, the way maps announce a place with enthusiasm. The circle flashed once, then settled. Ideni swiped down to see the source, a calendar reminder with no category. White, titled simply, Arrived. Location, here. She had not written that. The phone, perhaps, had decided the day needed a label, or the small plaque had more to it than the page admitted. Anson said the woman in the photo had librarian eyes. He meant that as a compliment. He pointed at the key ring. He said his grandmother had been a keeper of the keys at a church in North Dakota, and those women know where every grief sits at every hour, the way a night janitor knows which chairs spit gum and which ones sigh. They stood a while. People walked past in respectful silence, guided by a docent's voice that held just enough theater to keep 15 people from wandering into their own daydreams. Spanish moss moved like thought repeating itself. A flake of light rose off the river and fell back as if it had changed its mind about being air. It would have been a good story already finding your own name on stone, a phone that had the audacity to tell you you had arrived, but something else decided to be true. A little tone sounded from the phone, the way sounds do when an app you forgot you had decides to help. It was the noise her AirDrop made when someone nearby wanted to share a photo at inopportune moments. The screen shifted to a dialogue. A file offered to send itself to her. The sender name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The file name read Keys. Anson leaned in and made his face calm. Decline, he said gently, because strangers in public places with quick hands make tricks, and both of them work in museums and have seen every version of the human habit of testing boundaries. She hovered. Decline would be wise. Accept would be a dare. She pressed accept because sometimes you let stories finish what they start. The file downloaded. It was not a photo. It was an audio file, a minute 42 in length. The waveform showed it wasn't silence. She tilted the phone toward her own ear instead of speaker because you don't open a voice in a cemetery loud unless the voice has earned the right. Static first, then the sound of wind combing something thin, then a woman's voice, the age of a woman, who tells tools where they belong and expects cooperation. The voice said, dry as a towel and warm as a summer kitchen. If you are standing over me, child, and your name is mine, you can help me keep my promises. Put your phone on the stone and leave it be a minute. It will tell you where to stand next. Anson's eyebrows did a small jazz riff and then tried to behave. Okay, he said softly, a word that meant, I am here and I am not going to ruin this with cleverness. Ideni set the phone on the flat top of the headstone the way the voice had instructed. The screen slid into its lock. Her reflection replaced her. The oval photo looked past her shoulder the way old photos always do. She counted in her head as a way to keep the childish fear of being tricked from standing up and knocking the ritual with its elbow. 50, 60, 78. The phone buzzed once, she lifted it. The map opened of its own accord. The blue dot had moved nothing. The gray pin had changed. It labeled another grave 30 yards north with a name neither of them had seen on the paper map. Rosin Hale. A second name. Another Hale. The first name was Welsh and not common here. They went because the day had asked enough times to be answered polite. The second stone stood lower, more modest. The granite, a color you could never find on purpose if you looked in a catalog. The dates were older, 1931 to 1999. The epitaph read, "She kept the gate lighted," and under that, in smaller letters, so faint you could only see them when the cloud put its hand over the sun, a line, Rosine was born. Rosine Idris. She married into Hale and stayed. Tell my niece if she comes through here that I see her when I count keys. I am not anybody's niece, Idris said aloud, and then took a breath because she heard the defensiveness squirreled underneath. I mean, not hers. You might be more people's niece than you know, Anson said gently, a man who had grown up with uncles who weren't uncles and yet were more family than the kind that wears your face. They stood while the wind added a signature to the bottom of the page of the day. The river put its shoulder against the bank and leaned. The phone did not ping again for a while. A cardinal went from one branch to another with the purposeful speed of a person who knows where the parts are stored. A group of teenagers trailed an auntie through the lanes, popping gum in a respectful way, which is a regional miracle. Idani looked up Rosin on the cemetery's database because when your heart gets odd, facts make a braid to hold on to. The database was one of those volunteer-built websites that carry the tone of a potluck where everyone brings a dish so exact it shames you for choosing salad. Rosin's entry was thorough. Born Rhonda Valley, came across with parents as a child, settled in Chatham County, married one Mr. Hale, worked checklist after checklist for the electrical union office, sang alto in church with the patience of an anvil, survived by no children, preceded by older brothers, all gone. Niece mentioned in an obituary in 1999 with no name given. Anson made a sound that meant the story had wiped its hands on his shirt and was ready to cook. The phone chimed once more, now with the tone her museum app uses when a beacon in an exhibit hands you a fact. She had turned beacons off last month because being interrupted by history while in history felt a bit like a stage whisper in a quiet theater. She had not turned beacons back on. The screen read, "A note is waiting." A map pinpointed the little brick building the cemetery uses as a workshop for the grounds crew. A path drew itself in blue between the Hales and the shop, like a string in a child's game. They went because keys that ask to be found deserve not to rust. The door to the shop was propped with a cinder block the way doors are propped everywhere when the weather learns to be useful. A radio played a station that chose old soul and occasional baseball score updates. No one was at the counter. A bell stood there anyway, the kind that rings a sound like a glass penny. Anson rang it because he likes participating in obvious rituals. A man in his 50s with a badge that read August came in from the back, wiping his hands on a rag that had earned its keep. "You folks need a map," he asked, then took a longer look at their faces and revised. "Or a minute." "We were by the Hale Stones," Idani said, and watched the way a man looks when a rhyme finds his ear and tells him it cares. August nodded. "Course you were," he said. "I keep an envelope for that family. Been waiting on who it's waiting on." He reached under the counter, where drawers have learned to hold what should not be lost, and brought up a large yellow envelope with a blue paperclip that had rusted a little by choosing weather. The envelope had 3 words on the front in tidy block letters. For the next Idani, heat went across her face like an honest light. August saw it and stilled. He handed her the envelope the way people hand one another babies, meaning well and moving slow. She opened it with her thumb. Inside, 3 items. A small brass key, old, not ornate, with teeth filed like a decision. A folded sheet torn from a spiral notebook, edges soft with years. and a wallet-sized photo of a woman in a blue work shirt with a name patch and a grin you could feel in your back like afternoon Sunday. The patch read, "I Donny." The face belonged to the woman on the first stone. The note was written in blue ballpoint in a hand that pressed harder than paper deserves. It read, "Simple. For the next Idani in this county who can hear me the way a key hears a lock, my niece is out there. She won't say yes to the word niece because words are stubborn. She'll need to open the box in the old mausoleum we keep for tools and favors. The key is for the small door on the left. Lift on the latch while you turn. The box has what belongs to her and me and her grandmother. If she is standing at my stone with a phone, she will know that I know. Don't bring a crowd. Bring one friend who reads instructions with his eyes. Leave the key when you are done. We can count without hands here. I'm not someone's niece," she said again, and heard how the sentence grew less certain with practice. Her mother's family tree began and ended in a different state. A line of women who told polite lies to spare one another the sharp edges and did their grief in broom closets. Her father had not survived long enough to name distant relations. He had left behind a bent screwdriver and a smell that her body still could find when a day asked. Anson's hand found the counter in a quick pat, like checking for keys as you leave the house. "You don't have to be a niece to be the person meant to do a thing," he said. "But also you might, and it might not matter how that happened." August tapped the counter twice, a habit that sounded like a yes. "The small left door," he said. "People never see it. Take the path behind the office and go right at the angel with the missing hand. The mausoleum is the little brick one that looks polite. The left door sticks the way a lie sticks to a room. Do what the note said, lift and turn." They went back into the light. The blue string on the map did not bother now to draw. The path knew their feet. The angel with the missing hand stood where the volunteer had said, "Angels stand, face east," blank expression that suggested she had witnessed every century and found nothing quite bad enough to frown at yet. The brick mausoleum waited with that small pride buildings have when they know they are not the grandest on the block, but are the one that does the job without complaint. The left door looked like a panel added later. The brass latch had the smoothness that comes of being touched by people who mean to get work done. Idani slid the key in, the teeth caught, and then thought better of it. She lifted the latch with her other hand and turned. The lock gave. The door opened 6 inches and stopped, ticked by a wooden wedge that had been insinuated at the bottom by someone who had not wanted the door opened by accident or habit. Anson reached down and pulled the wedge free. It had a date burned into it with a soldering iron. 2014. The year on the first stone. Inside was a closet of sorts, pegboards and hooks, a rake missing its second tooth, a coil of twine that had memorized its circle and would not learn a new trick, and on a shelf at eye level, a tin bread box with a domed lid, painted a green faded to the color of river glass. No lock. Written in the same blue hand on a piece of tape was a word. Hail. She lifted the lid like a person lifts lids on boxes that might contain bees or inheritance. Inside, arranged with the blunt care of someone who never made a mess unless a branch fell where it shouldn't, sat 3 items. A narrow ledger with a black cloth spine. A key fob with 3 small brass tags stamped with numbers, and a folded paper bag, the kind grocery stores use for baking flour, rolled tight and rubber banded with an elasticity that made its own sound. She opened the ledger first, because pages are her map. Names, rows of them, dates, locations in the cemetery with check marks where gates had failed and been repaired. Next to some entries, a small star. Those starred names also appeared on the little brass tags. Numbers, not random, not plot numbers, locker numbers. The cemetery kept a bank of lockers for the grounds crew in a shed she had not thought needed one. Her phone chimed in her pocket, a small suggestion from the maps. Direction nudged, left, then right. Then, would you like to add this location to favorites? She ignored the phone. The ledger asked for attention. On the inside back cover of the ledger, a note in different handwriting. Spare for Rosen's niece if she finds it. Locker 12 holds what isn't in the ground. If days are bad, tell the river. The river tells me. The tags on the key fob read 10, 12, 14. She ran her finger over 12 the way a person does over a scar. She felt nothing supernatural. She felt focus. Anson took the bag at her nod and unwound the rubber band. Inside lay two objects wrapped in butcher paper. He unrolled the first. A locket. Gold. Thin as luck. With a hairline crack. Shaped like lightning. If lightning were careful. Inside, a photograph so tiny it could be breathed away if you weren't paying mind. A baby in a christening gown that had borrowed lace from a curtain. The face pinched in the way newborn faces pinch. On the back, in pencil that had migrated into the paper like a crop planting itself, a name. Rosen Idris Hale. A line below it, for my niece to hold if she comes to hear me. He unrolled the second. A county map from 1968, creased, the paper's fiber gone feathery at the folds. A road circled in blue pencil, a margin note. That old step bridge out by the waterworks. We left something in the middle beam in 74. If you can't find it, it means we didn't need it. If you can, well, you'll know. We are not going to a step bridge at dusk, Anson said. A man who loved old maps and also loved not getting in the paper under the wrong kind of headline. We are going to find Locker 12 while the Museum of the Dead is still on our side. They found the shed. August had seen their faces through the glass and met them halfway with the keys because some stories ask for a witness who knows better than to narrate. He led them to a wall of small metal lockers, each door painted the dull red of a barn that had not given up but had learned to pace itself. He unlocked 12 and stepped back. Inside lay a small stack of shallow boxes, each labeled with a date. The top was the 1, 2014. Under that, 2008. Under that, 1999. Anson lifted the top box and set it on a workbench. He opened it with care. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had become more suggestion than paper, sat a handful of objects that people keep for reasons the living should not pretend to understand quickly. A church key. A photo of 3 women, arms crossed, outside a union hall, one of them with a name patch that read R. Hale, a Polaroid of a red step bridge with water under it purling toward a bend. A handwritten note folded small. The note read, "For the niece who knows the word niece because keys hum when they find their door. You were not an accident. We kept count. We named you all the ways we could. Our names were soft and stubborn. Take what you want, leave the ledger so the ground does not have to work alone." She sat because standing felt rude. She is a woman whose mother did not tell stories with this kind of curve. She gathered the truth like thread. Her mother had been born in this county and left when she was 19, a bus to another state, a man met in a grocery line, a child years later when the idea of staying had become heavy. She did not talk about siblings, claimed not to remember cousins, flinched when the phrase back home came up. The name Hale had come not from romance, but from accident or choice, a name taken because other names insisted on being something else. Rosen Idris had married into Hale, but the family had been built long before that. Keys had been passed with and without rings. August stood with a posture that says, "I will not take your moment away from you." When the radio in the shed shifted to a weather update, he reached and turned it down so the forecast would not interrupt a storm already occurring. Anson put his hand flat on the bench and counted to 8 for no reason his body would confess. "Tell me if you want me not to read the other notes," he said. The kind of friend a person needs in rooms where both mystery and bureaucracy show up at the same table. "Read," she said. "We're already here." The note in the 1999 box was from Rosen and felt like laughter on a porch when the pots are already washed. "The house we put ourselves in is not one the county believes holds blood," she wrote. "But it holds me. And it holds the keys. If you need a name, the river has one. If you need a door, the shed does." In the box from 2008, a different hand, shakier, it read, "I kept the lights in the gate, all through the storms. I think sometimes we are simply the people who keep lights. If you are mine, you will know when to turn one on." In the box from 2014 was a letter from the sexton whose face smiled off the oval on the stone. She wrote like a woman who had lived by the kind of lists that get family through winter. I have no children of my own except the Gates, she wrote, but I have a niece, whether the paper says it or not. I kept her not by being in the room, but by owning my stubbornness. If she stands over me with a phone and hears me, she will take what she needs and leave what she should, and I will go on counting with my hands in dirt like I like to do. They left the boxes as they'd found them, shifted nothing but air. August closed the locker with a satisfaction that felt like lining up the edges on a stack of bills and smoothing them down. He did not ask for anyone's story. He had one of his own, built of this place, and the line of names he keeps with the quiet grace of a man who waters plants. By the time they stepped back into the paths, the light had hunched into evening. The river sounded less like sheet music and more like a phrase repeating. The map on her phone had stopped suggesting anything and gone back to pretending it was an obedient device. The air smelled like river, camellia, and a penny someone had worried in a good pocket for a decade. Anson asked if she wanted to go to the step bridge. She said no, in a voice that held both sorrow and a plan. Tomorrow, in daylight. When names sit on surfaces more politely. He agreed because this is what friendship is, a committee about timing. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the ledger borrowed under August's nod and the locket under her thumb. She called her mother. The call rolled twice, and then the voice she knew and loved and sometimes resented filled the line with wind and caution. They made small talk for 30 seconds, and then they moved somewhere they had not walked together. Ma, she said, who was Rosen? Who was Idony before me? Silence, sincere. A kettle, somewhere in the house. The refrigerator willing itself to be steady. Finally, her mother sighed, and the sigh sounded like a drawer allowed to close after being held open too many years. My aunt, she said, not by blood, by the kind of line people draw when the law does not help. She and the other one, the sexton, kept me safe when I was little and didn't know that my father wasn't safe to be around. They ran the lights in the cemetery and in the loose latch doors and told me when to lock things and when to open them. They were more my aunts than any of the few relatives that share me. When I left everything. I thought that was how you survive. I have not told you the parts you asked me about because I thought you'd want something tidier than I had, and because I am silly enough to think if I did not say the names, the ache would go to sleep. She told a story of a girl who sat on a stoop counting keys while two women kept a town's small doors in working order, literal and figurative. She told how those women had taught her to move through rooms with respect and to leave envelopes where they'd be needed. She did not speak tenderly about the man who invented the silence she had carried. She spoke tenderly about the other men, the ones who changed locks without asking why, and taught a child where the ladders were kept for days when rain insisted. I should have told you, her mother said finally, soft with the fatigue of a woman who has not confessed a simple truth for a long time. You have two names, the one I gave you and the one the other women left for you to find when you were ready. You belong to both. You belong to yourself most. They went to the step bridge the next day. It was out by the old waterworks, just as the margin note had said. The county had let weeds try to become the principal of the place, and the weeds had accepted the assignment with poor posture and pride. The bridge stood, red paint scabbed into beauty, water under it moving with the impatient streams have when the river bullies them with schedule. In the middle beam, behind a square of metal the size of a book, a hollowed space. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, a ring of keys on a chain that had learned 3 hands. Each key had a number, 10, 12, 14. The fob matched the tags in the box. Beside the keys lay a square of paper with a tiny handprint in paint the color of that old camellia behind the office. A child had been here once. She had pressed her hand down. Someone had saved it for a woman who would put her hand down later and understand they did not take the keys. She set her palm over the handprint. The sizes did not match. The feeling did. She closed the plate. She and Anson walked back to the car with the sun finding their shoulders and the hum of insects writing their own accurate dissertations on persistence. Back at the cemetery, she returned the ledger. August nodded like a man at the end of a good piece of work. She walked to the first stone and put two fingers on the glazed oval where the sexton's face had learned to look past tourists to the river. She did not speak. She let the ground and the river carry whatever needed moving. Her phone did not ping again there. It would ping months later, once in a grocery store aisle in a different city, when an older woman in a union jacket looked at her and tilted her head in a way that meant keys are a language. It would ping once again when she held the hand of a friend through a night much too long and heard as clearly as weather a voice say, "Lift and turn." It would ping at odd hours for the next several years when doors asked to be locked or opened with care. Sometimes it would be an app acting like a person, sometimes it would be a person acting like a map, sometimes it would be a name arriving in a room with good manners and old roots. If you want the tidy ending, it is this. She wrote to the memorial company to ask who had access to the airdrop at the stone. No one answered in a way that satisfied anyone who cares about permissions. She kept the photo of the sexton in her wallet behind the museum badge and found that having a face like that near your ID keeps you from forgetting where the door to the stairwell is in a fire. She learned to count gates with her hands, the way women in that county had since the first lock learned the first habit. She took pies to August's workbench and listened to his stories. She phoned her mother on Sundays and let the conversation go long enough to find the sentence that mattered each week. She carried with her the sentence from the oval's page. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. If you want the less tidy truth, it is this. Sometimes your life is a geofence you didn't set. Sometimes you arrive at your own name carved in stone, and the stone says, "Welcome." Sometimes you are the niece of women who bent keys into new jobs and called that bending prayer. Sometimes your phone pings at a grave, and the ping is only a device doing what it was taught, and sometimes it is a noise a river makes when it is trying to talk through everyone's machines at once. If this happens to you, if you walk under trees that have learned the art of holding up clouds, and a little bell sounds in your pocket, and your name appears as a place, don't panic. Stand where you are. Read the dates out loud so the year will stop pretending it is only a number. Touch the stone with two fingers, not more. Listen for the voice that sounds like someone who knows where the ladders are kept. If a key is offered, lift and turn. If a door sticks, lift and turn. If a person asks for a niece, say the word niece like a new tool you know how to use. And when you leave, take the long path that wanders near the bluff. The river will be there keeping count. The oaks will be there practicing their patient grammar. Your phone will settle back into behaving. The ground will remember you, not because you are special, but because that is what ground does for people who treat it like a partner. Somewhere behind you, a bell on a worker's desk will ring, and a man named August will nod to no one and say out loud into an empty shed, "She arrived." Then he will sweep the floor in slow, exact strokes, as if he were writing the names in dust and erasing them on purpose so the day could begin again and mean it.